Hello.
I pierced my wife's condom because she was cheating on me, and this is what came out of it. My wife cheated on me with a rich guy from the business center. For that, I ruined her life with one social media poll. My name is James, and if you'd asked anyone who knew me a year ago, they would have said I had it all together. I worked my ass off to build my career from the ground up, and for the longest time, I thought I was doing everything right. I had a solid job, a nice house, and Emma, my wife, my supposed partner, was always right there beside me, or at least that's what I thought. Emma and I had been married for 7 years, and I used to believe we were rock solid. She worked as an accountant, a steady job at some big business center in town, and she'd always have these occasional work trips to attend seminars. No big deal, right? I never once questioned her. Why would I? We had a routine, a life together that I thought was built on trust. But looking back now, I was the biggest fool in the world. It was after one of those work trips that things started to change. At first, it was small, little stuff I could have shrugged off. Emma came home late, claiming she had urgent projects to finish, and she was always on her phone, way more than she used to be. She wouldn't leave it out in the open anymore, always clutching it like it held some big secret. I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just stressed from work. I even convinced myself she was just tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started creeping in, gnawing at me whenever I saw her glued to her phone or leaving the house in a rush without a word of explanation. She was distant, colder than I'd ever seen her. And damn it, no matter how much I tried to push it down, my gut told me something was wrong. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, pretend like everything was fine, I knew deep down I couldn't keep lying to myself forever. It all came to a head after her last trip. That's when things got real weird. She came back different, like more than just tired or stressed. She was distant. She stopped looking me in the eyes, even when we were talking about random stuff like bills or dinner plans. She'd give me these half-assed answers like her mind was somewhere else, and I could feel this wall building between us. I tried to shake it off at first, told myself, it's just work stress, right? Maybe she's got a big project or some asshole boss breathing down her neck. But it wasn't just that. She'd stopped wanting to spend time together, too. Before, we used to have these lazy Sunday mornings, drinking coffee, talking about nothing and everything. But now, she'd grab her phone, say she had errands to run, and disappear for hours. And when she did come home, it was like I wasn't even there. Just a hey and off to the bedroom. The worst part, the way she started hiding her phone. I never used to care about it. I mean, we're adults. We should be able to trust each other, right? But now, that damn thing was glued to her hand. She wouldn't leave it anywhere for more than a few minutes. I tried to play it cool, act like I didn't notice, but it was impossible not to. It was like she was afraid I'd see something. Then one night, I got a bit bolder. She was in the shower, and I saw her phone light up with a text. The screen lit up just enough for me to see part of the message. It was from someone named C. I didn't catch the whole thing, but what I did see, it was enough to make my heart pound. The message just said, "Miss you too." I felt like a bomb had just gone off in my chest. I stared at the phone, debating if I should pick it up and check more. But that wasn't me. I wasn't the guy who snooped through my wife's messages like some paranoid idiot. Or at least, I didn't think I was. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night after that, I'd catch her sneaking glances at her phone with this small smile. One I hadn't seen in months, and it sure as hell wasn't for me. The texts, the late nights, the urgent work meetings. It was all adding up, and not in a good way. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I needed to know what the hell was really going on, because whatever this was, it wasn't just in my head anymore. I started to lose sleep over it. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her sneaking around, meeting someone behind my back. I tried to shake it off, but it felt like poison in my veins, eating away at me. And I couldn't talk to anyone about it either. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I think my wife's cheating on me, but I'm not sure? My pride wouldn't let me. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I began tracking every move she made. It wasn't hard, honestly, because the changes were right there, smacking me in the face. The urgent work meetings after hours became more frequent. Almost every other night she had something come up, some last-minute crisis at the office that needed her attention. And every time, she came home late, smelling faintly of some perfume I didn't recognize. Not hers, and definitely not mine. And then there were the excuses. Jesus, the excuses. If it wasn't work, it was a girl's night or some new hobby she'd suddenly picked up. Emma never cared about yoga, and now she was doing it twice a week with her coworkers. She'd come back all sweaty, her hair a mess, but with this strange glow in her eyes. A glow that hadn't been there for me in God knows how long. The final straw? One night, I called her at work just to check in. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and after an hour of no reply, I called her office. The guy who answered, he told me she had left hours ago. My blood ran cold. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, like it was mocking me. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was drowning. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. I wanted to believe she was just out with her friends, or maybe she had car trouble or something. Anything that wasn't what I feared. But deep down, I knew. I fucking knew. When she finally walked through the door that night, I watched her closely. She acted normal, like nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, but it was one of those quick, absent-minded pecks. The kind you give when your mind is somewhere else. I asked her how work was, and she smiled, rattling off some bullshit about meetings and deadlines. I could barely hear her over the ringing in my ears. I didn't push her on it that night. I didn't say a word about calling her office, about knowing she hadn't been there. I just let it simmer inside me, like a fire slowly burning out of control. If she was lying to my face, I needed proof. I couldn't go to her with just a gut feeling. I needed cold, hard evidence. So I made a decision. I'd find out exactly what she was doing. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her keep making me feel like a fool. I knew I couldn't keep living like that, constantly second-guessing everything she said, feeling like a damn detective in my own marriage. So I decided to take things into my own hands. I figured if she wasn't going to be honest with me, I'd get the truth myself. I needed to know who this C person was, and what the hell had been going on during her so-called work trips. I started digging. At first, it was small things. I went through our credit card bills, scanning every line, looking for any charges that didn't make sense. And wouldn't you know it, I found some. A couple of hotel charges popped up that I had no memory of us ever staying at, especially during the times Emma was supposed to be at those seminars. They were fancy places too, definitely not the kind of spot she'd stay for some boring work conference. Next, I checked her calendar on our shared computer. She wasn't careful about deleting her appointments. A couple of times, she'd marked down yoga, but the location didn't line up with a yoga studio. In fact, it was in the completely opposite direction, near a hotel I'd seen on the credit card statement. My stomach dropped. It was starting to add up. The late nights, the secrecy, the way she suddenly acted like I didn't exist. My gut was screaming at me that she was cheating, but I still needed something concrete, something I couldn't ignore or explain away. That's when I decided to ask around. One of my buddies from college worked in corporate security, and he knew people who could get info on just about anyone. I hated to pull him into this, but I was desperate. He owed me a favor anyway, so I called him up one night, told him what was going on, and asked if he could help. He didn't even hesitate. A couple of days later, he got back to me. What he found made my heart stop. He had called the hotel Emma was staying at during her last seminar and asked a few questions. The concierge had no problem giving him some information since it wasn't a private inquiry. Just asking about a guest, pretending he was booking a future stay. He asked about Emma and confirmed she had checked in, but she wasn't alone. When he told me that, it felt like a punch to the gut. Some guy had been with her. tall, dark-haired, and a regular guest at that same hotel. I could barely breathe. I hung up the phone and just sat there for a while, staring at nothing, trying to process it. Everything inside me wanted to scream, to punch something, to throw all her stuff out of the house and make her face the wreckage she'd caused. But instead, I sat there in the quiet, feeling my blood boil. I wasn't going to lose it. No, I was going to play this smart. If Emma thought she was going to get away with this, she had no idea who she was dealing with. After that call, I felt like I was living in a parallel universe, just going through the motions. I knew the truth now, or at least enough of it, but I had to act normal. I couldn't tip her off that I was onto her. Not yet. If I played my cards right, I could turn this whole thing on its head. Emma kept acting like nothing was wrong, coming home with that fake smile, chatting about her day like she hadn't just been screwing another man in some hotel room. Every word she said grated on me. It took everything I had not to explode at her, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed to wait until I had everything lined up, every piece of the puzzle. The more I thought about it, the more my anger turned into something sharper, something colder. Simple revenge wasn't enough. No, she had to feel it, really feel the weight of her betrayal. And I wanted to destroy her life in a way she'd never recover from. So I kept digging, gathering more proof. I didn't have to look too hard because she was sloppy. One day, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I knew this was my chance. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I opened her messages, scrolled past the usual work group chats, and then I saw it. The text from C. I don't know why I expected anything different, but seeing the words with my own eyes sent a wave of rage through me. Their messages were sickening, full of "I miss you and can't wait to see you again." And there it was, plain as day, their plans to meet up during her yoga class later that week. I took a deep breath, took screenshots of everything, and sent them to myself. I wasn't stupid enough to confront her right away. I needed to wait for the right moment, and I needed more than just texts. After that, I had enough to confirm what I'd known in my gut for months. She was having an affair. And it wasn't just some fling either. This was something she'd been planning, hiding, for God knows how long. I couldn't even look at her without feeling sick, but I still played my part. I smiled when she walked through the door, kissed her on the cheek like nothing had changed. I had to bide my time. If I was going to make her pay, I had to be patient. I had to make sure every part of her life came crashing down, just like she had shattered mine. I started planning. This wasn't going to be a screaming match or some dramatic confrontation where she'd play the victim. No, this was going to be slow, calculated, and brutal. I wanted her to feel the isolation, the shame, and the regret. I wanted her to watch her life fall apart piece by piece, just like I'd watched my marriage crumble. The first step was to start gathering more people on my side. Emma had a lot of friends at work, and I knew some of them wouldn't take kindly to her screwing around with some guy while pretending to be the perfect wife. I reached out to a couple of her co-workers, people who were decent enough to hate this kind of betrayal as much as I did. Subtly, I dropped hints about how things weren't so perfect at home, about how she'd been spending a lot of time away, lying about where she was. It didn't take much. People loved to gossip, especially in an office. Once the rumors started circulating, it was only a matter of time before they reached the higher-ups. Once I planted those seeds at her workplace, things started to move on their own. It wasn't long before Emma's perfect little world began to show cracks. At first, it was subtle. I could tell by the way she acted when she came home. More on edge, a little less talkative. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel something was off. She'd ask me if everything was okay, and I'd just smile and tell her everything was fine, playing dumb while her own lies began to unravel around her. I kept pushing. My next step was making sure she couldn't run from what she'd done. One night, I got in contact with a private investigator. It was the final piece I needed to ensure there was no way she could talk her way out of this. I handed him everything I had, the hotel names, the dates, the screenshots, and asked him to follow her. I needed photos, videos, something concrete. He promised to get back to me after her next yoga session. A couple of days later, I got the call. My PI had followed her to the hotel. He sent me a few pictures. There she was, walking in with the tall, dark-haired guy I had heard about. Seeing it laid out like that, the evidence in front of me, it was like a punch to the gut all over again. But at the same time, it solidified my resolve. There was no turning back now. I had everything I needed. I wasn't stupid enough to confront her just yet, though. No. The time for that was coming, but I wanted to make sure I'd covered every angle. If I was going to do this, it had to be done right. I couldn't just ruin her marriage. I wanted to ruin her reputation, her career, her whole life. The cracks at work were already starting to spread. People were talking about her behind her back, and she was starting to notice. I heard her on the phone one night, talking to one of her friends, asking if she'd heard anything about what people were saying at the office. Her voice had that nervous edge to it, like she was afraid of what was coming, but still too proud to admit it. I stayed quiet, letting her squirm, and then one night, she came home looking rattled. I'll never forget that look on her face. Half panic, half confusion. She sat down at the kitchen table, didn't even bother to eat, just stared at her phone like it held all the answers. I asked her what was wrong, and she gave me some bullshit excuse about stress at work. I could tell she was lying through her teeth, but I didn't press her. I didn't need to. She didn't know it yet. But everything was already set in motion. Her precious little world was about to come crashing down, and I was going to be the one to watch her crumble under it all. I had laid out the groundwork. The whispers at her job were getting louder. The doubts in her mind were growing, and she had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. It was almost time for me to make my move. But I wasn't done yet. She deserved worse. The fallout didn't take long to start. The next morning, Emma went off to work like usual, completely unaware that her entire world was starting to unravel. I spent the day waiting, checking my phone, half expecting to get a call from her in a panic. But it wasn't until the late afternoon that I finally got the text. "Can we talk when I get home?" I stared at the screen for a minute, feeling that surge of satisfaction. It had begun. Whatever had happened at work, it was big enough to shake her. I didn't reply right away. Let her stew in it. When she walked through the door that evening, I could tell immediately that something was wrong. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. Her usual fake smiles were gone. She didn't even say hello, just dropped her bag and sat down at the kitchen table with a deep sigh. I sat across from her, keeping my face neutral, though inside I was already savoring the moment. She finally spoke after a long, heavy silence. "Something's going on at work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone sent an email to HR. About me. I acted surprised. "What kind of email?" Her hands were shaking as she explained. It had pictures of me and some guy. They think we've been having an affair. I wanted to laugh at the way she said "some guy," like he didn't even matter now that her little secret was out. She was trying to play innocent, trying to act like she didn't know how it had all happened, but the cracks were showing. She was terrified. I could see it in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the way she kept fidgeting with her hands. "They're investigating it," she continued, her voice trembling. "I might lose my job, James." I sat back in my chair, pretending to think about what she'd said. "That's serious," I said, keeping my tone calm. "What are you going to do?" Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, wide and desperate. "I don't know. I swear I didn't. I mean, it's not what they think it is. It's just a misunderstanding." She was stumbling over her words, scrambling to find some excuse, some way to explain it away. I stayed quiet, watching her squirm. It was almost pathetic how quickly she crumbled. All those lies she'd built up, the facade of a perfect life, and now, with just a few emails and some pictures, it was falling apart in front of her eyes. I didn't push her that night. I didn't need to. The fear was already eating away at her, and the longer I stayed silent, the more she unraveled. She spent the whole evening pacing the house, muttering to herself, probably trying to figure out how to fix it, how to spin her way out of it. But there was no fixing it this time. She was in too deep. The next day, the cracks started to spread even wider. Word must have gotten around the office, because by mid-morning, she texted me again, this time more frantic. People are talking about me at work. They know about the email. I don't know what to do. I waited a few hours before I replied. Maybe it's time to come clean, I said, knowing full well that was the last thing she wanted to hear. When she came home that evening, she looked even worse than the night before. I could see the panic in her eyes, the way she was barely holding it together. She didn't even bother to eat dinner. Just sat in the living room staring at her phone, probably waiting for the call from HR telling her it was over. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse for her, the next blow hit. One of her friends, former friends, must have gotten a hold of the messages I'd sent around. That night, her phone lit up with notifications from the group chat she'd always been part of. I could hear from the kitchen, the constant ding, ding, ding as the messages poured in. I walked into the living room, pretending like I didn't know what was happening. "Who's texting you so much?" I asked, knowing damn well it wasn't good. She barely looked up, her face drained of color. "It's my friends. They know about the affair." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she broke down, sobbing into her hands. "They've all turned against me." I stood there, watching her fall apart in front of me, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, just a cold satisfaction. This was what she deserved. She had betrayed me, lied to me, treated me like I was some fool. Now, she was the one being thrown to the wolves, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the days passed, Emma's life kept crumbling. Just as I knew it would, her office was buzzing with gossip, and HR was up her ass, investigating the affair. She was barely holding on. She tried to stay calm, acting like everything was fine, but I could see it in her eyes. She was breaking down bit by bit, and I just sat back and let it happen. But it wasn't enough yet. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, helpless, betrayed, shattered. She still hadn't lost everything, so I kept pushing. I knew the one thing left in her life she still had control over was her reputation outside of work. People in town knew us as the happy couple, and she played that role so well. But I was going to strip that from her too. It was time to go public. I reached out to a few people we both knew, friends from church, parents from the school our kids went to. These were the people who always looked at us as the perfect couple, the ones who would never believe Emma was capable of cheating. I let them know, casually at first, what had been going on behind closed doors. I made sure to drop hints about her business trips and the nights she'd spent away, just enough to plant the seed of doubt in their minds. Then I posted the screenshots. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to let everyone see what I'd been dealing with. I didn't say much in the post, just that I'd been betrayed and that it was time people knew the truth. I didn't name names, but the evidence spoke for itself. Anyone who knew Emma could piece it together. The reactions came fast. My phone blew up with messages, some people offering support, others expressing shock, and a few not-so-subtle digs at Emma's character. It didn't take long for word to spread. Suddenly, she wasn't just dealing with rumors at work. Our entire social circle knew what she'd done. When she found out, it was like watching someone come apart at the seams. She stormed into the house that night, her face pale with fury. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed, throwing her phone on the table. "Why would you post that? Everyone's talking about it." "My parents called me, James. My parents." I shrugged, playing it cool. "People deserve to know the truth, Emma. You weren't going to tell them, so I did." She looked at me like I was some kind of monster, but I didn't care. This wasn't about being reasonable anymore. She had crossed the line, and now she was paying the price. "You had no right," she hissed, tears filling her eyes. "You ruined my life." I laughed bitterly. "Ruined your life? You did that the second you decided to sleep with him." She collapsed into the chair, her whole body shaking. "I was wrong, okay? I was stupid, but this is too far. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt us. The kids, our family, everyone, the kids. She always brought them up like they were her shield, like they'd protect her from the consequences of her actions. I wasn't buying it. Don't you dare bring them into this, I snapped. You did this. You chose this. Her sobs filled the room, but they didn't move me. She wasn't crying out of guilt. She was crying because she got caught. There was a difference. And just like that, the final piece of her life fell apart. Word spread through town faster than I expected. Her friends cut her off completely, and even the ones who tried to stay neutral couldn't stand the heat of being associated with her. Her parents were furious, especially her father. I'm sure the disappointment in his voice was worse than anything I could have said. I wasn't privy to that conversation, but I saw how she came home afterward, hollowed out, like someone had sucked the life out of her. By now, Emma had lost everything that mattered to her. Her job was on the line. Her friends had abandoned her. Her reputation was in tatters. She barely left the house, and when she did, she moved like a ghost. Quiet, keeping her head down, like she was trying to disappear. It was exactly what I wanted. She was finally feeling what I had felt all those months, and there was no escape for her. After Emma lost her job, things in the house were different. The silence between us became unbearable. She spent her days locked away in the bedroom, barely coming out, and when she did, it was like she was in a daze. She looked hollow, like the life had been sucked out of her. And maybe it had. I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. I had spent months planning, watching her fall apart, and now that it was done, there was nothing left between us. We were just two people living in the same house, pretending like the whole thing hadn't gone to hell. The divorce papers had been signed, the house was mine, and she had nothing left. But it wasn't enough to just watch her fade away. I wanted her out of my life for good. I sat her down one night, ready to end this once and for all. She looked like a mess, hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes, and I could tell she knew what was coming. She didn't even fight it. When I told her she had to leave, she just nodded, staring at the floor like she was too exhausted to argue. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore, Emma. You did this to yourself." She nodded again, wiping away tears that barely seemed to register anymore. She didn't ask for anything, no money, no help, nothing. She just got up and walked away, like she had finally accepted that her life was over. And maybe it was. It took her a week to pack up her things, and when the day came, she left without a word. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. She was already gone from my life, and I was done with her. Word got around fast after that. In a small town, news spreads like wildfire, and Emma's fall from grace became the talk of the neighborhood. The woman who used to be the envy of every wife on our street was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. Someone who had it all and threw it away for a cheap affair. Her friends didn't reach out. Her family didn't either. She was completely alone. I heard rumors here and there. People saying she had moved in with some distant cousin in another town, trying to scrape together whatever life she could salvage. But every once in a while, I'd hear whispers about her name popping up on social media, always tied to some gossip or joke about her betrayal. She had become a meme, a symbol of public humiliation. I didn't follow up much. I didn't care enough to. I just knew she was ruined, and that was enough for me. I had what I wanted, the revenge, the payback. It was all done, and yet I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Watching her life crumble didn't bring me the closure I had expected. Sure, I had destroyed her, made her pay for everything she had done, but at what cost? My own life felt emptier than ever. I thought ruining her would heal the hurt, make me feel whole again. But all it did was leave me standing in the ashes of what used to be my life, alone. The truth is, no matter how much pain I caused her, it didn't erase the pain she had caused me. After Emma left, I tried to move on with my life. I had the house, my job, my freedom. For the first time in months, there was no more tension, no more lies. The silence wasn't her anymore. It was just me, alone. I thought that was what I wanted. But after everything that happened, the emptiness hung over me like a shadow. I'd go to work, come home, sit in front of the TV, crack open a beer, and just exist. The satisfaction I thought would come with destroying Emma's life never really showed up. Sure, I had made her pay for what she did, but at the end of the day, I was still left with the wreckage of what used to be my life. Every now and then, I'd hear about her. Small town gossip. People whispering about how she was struggling to find work, how she'd been living with a relative out of state. Some said she was couch surfing, barely getting by. The person she had been was gone. She wasn't the confident, smiling woman everyone once admired. She was just a shell, barely surviving. Her reputation was ruined. Her name, once respected, was now associated with betrayal and scandal. People talked about her like she was some kind of cautionary tale. Nobody wanted anything to do with her. It was like she had been erased, like she didn't exist anymore except in people's whispers. Even her own family kept their distance, too ashamed to acknowledge her after everything she'd done.
Click the subscribe button and go watch more videos.